able to see their data and track it and then benchmark it either compared to national or international standards or their own internal averages and standards to be able to improve the process of care within their organization. That's really where the value is in some of this technology. I tell people
Welcome everyone. Your next episode on Profit Club Academy and the new Profit Club AI Academy. And now that we're all talking all things AI in this program, I've tracked down my good friend Rafi Salazar. Rafi, thanks for joining us on this new category of Profit Club.
yeah, thanks for having me.
Because you've been all over this space. Now, Rafi's no stranger to Profit Club and my programs.
Yeah.
If you want to check out his other session, he did a session. Check out section 2 of Profit Club Academy. In the how to improve communication skills section. He did a really good session on retention and engagement strategies. So that's kind of Rafi's his original thing, and now he's morphed himself in a bit more tech and AI and positioning, which we're going to discover today. The quick intro of Rafi, if you haven't seen him around, he's the principal owner of Rehab U Practice Solutions. He's the host of the Better Outcomes show, author of Better Outcomes: A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, which I kind of think is ironic, Rafi, because you're the author of the Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, and we're going to talk all things AI and tech,
Yeah.
which it's fantastic. His career trajectory: 10 years of experience in health management, clinical operations, marketing, business development. He spent time assistant professor in a graduate program of occupational therapy. He's been in all sorts of programs. His telehealth work has been discussed in Forbes. Now the other sideline for Rafi, he now helps innovative healthcare companies like tech startup platforms, software as a service companies develop effective positioning strategies and business development plans through his consulting work, which is what we're going to talk about today. And he still owns a practice, proactive rehab and wellness in beautiful Augusta. Busy man, Rafi.
Yeah. If you're not busy, you're just, what's the point, right?
So I suppose for those that didn't hear the original session we did for our members back when we talked about retention engagement, tell me a bit about just a quick brief of your background and then how you got into this, maybe into the AI space, how that kind of evolved for you, because that's a new gig for you a little bit.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was kind of just a natural confluence. So I've been doing work for physios mainly in the private practice space. I've done some work with larger healthcare systems, hospital systems and the like. And really the work was patient engagement, which was fancy for how do we keep these patients that you book to actually show up for their, follow-up appointments so that you actually, capitalize on the revenue that you had planned for. Especially in the US, the numbers are low, and I'm sure it's low across the world, where like 7 out of 10 patients that get referred to physical therapy don't complete their course of care. So a lot of my original consulting was all in this space of how do we get patients to buy into their plans of care, to be active participants, to get the outcomes that they want, and then also come back again, refer their friends, families, neighbors, etc. And I did that for years. I still do that a little bit with some clients from the olden days. And then that kind of merged over the last, I don't know, year and a half or so. I wrote the book, Better Outcomes: A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare, which is basically the framework for what I did with all of my consulting clients. So if you want to not pay me, go buy the book. You'll get the blueprint or the framework for humanizing healthcare. Well, after that book came out, I started getting a lot of inquiries because I had done some work with the State Department to transition during COVID and during the pandemic, transition a lot of their services into the virtual space. And a lot of that ended up being one of those things where people were trying to just replace in-clinic care with virtual care. And I saw from the outset, like that's not the winning path to leverage technology. So began doing a lot of work in that space with clients that were moving to virtual services and really looking at how to leverage technology in order to provide more of a continuity of care, really with the focus of hybrid care. So maybe the patient does come in or the client does come in for some work in the clinic, but then there's some time in between, right? Maybe they're coming twice a week. Well, there's 2 or 3 days in between where they're not in the clinic. And how can we leverage technology to engage them, to retain them throughout their course of care, but then also make sure that they're getting the outcomes that they want? So I started getting inquiries from tech companies that were saying, hey, we have XYZ tool. We think it's great. The clinicians say they love it, but it's not really working, or they're not really using it, or patients don't like it, or they use it for one or two sessions and then they stop. So a lot of the work that I was doing with the clinics really just shifted and focused to, okay, we've got technology that's going to be coming to the forefront. It's definitely going to be, the Pandora's box is open, it's not going back in. So how do we
Mm.
use it within the context of practice to improve clinical care, patient satisfaction, patient engagement, all of that kind of stuff? And it's just been funny that it's been filtering from the tech side instead of the clinician side. So it's actually the tech companies coming to me and saying, listen, we know our tool will help either patient engagement or retention. We just need to get the clinicians to use it, or we just need to get the patients to use it. So I do a lot of work with with those kind of companies on either go to market strategy or just positioning it for the clinicians to actually want to use it. So some of that work involves helping them develop clinical workflows so they can take their tool and just embed it into the context of practice. And then some
Yeah.
of it is more on the product development side as well.
I know we're going to talk. I mean, today's session is about remote therapeutic monitoring, which
Yeah,
kind of what I wanted to talk about. But can I delve into that for a second? So
sure.
the tech companies got technically this other stuff. So the tech companies have identified a great product or great that
Yeah,
might be something remote, but the therapists aren't using it or they're not getting
yeah.
buy-in. So because what are some of the barriers to adoption? You talked about, so how are you helping them get it? So if our owners buy the tech or get something that's AI, whatever it's based,
Yeah,
how do they get the team to use it? We've all got shockwave machines in podiatry practice sitting there gathering dust.
exactly.
How do we get around that?
Yeah, so a lot of it, actually, I'm working with a couple companies right now in the remote therapeutic monitoring space, and that's the problem they're having is especially here in the United States, there are insurance companies, payers that will reimburse. So there are codes, treatment codes for remote therapeutic monitoring. So it's basically money that's sitting on the table for work that clinicians are already doing. So the company has this tool, it allows remote therapeutic monitoring. They have this clinic that is bleeding money and could definitely use some revenue, and they just can't get the clinic to use it. So there are two big problems or potential barriers to implementing the technology that we've discovered. The first one is really just the idea of doing something different in practice. So, you know, some people have a hard time getting the idea of, okay, a patient comes in the clinic, I do these things with the patient. How am I supposed to do that virtually? So, and that's a pretty easy hurdle to get over. If you look at the research and you look at really what's available from a point of active versus passive treatments, and if you're moving patients more towards self-management, it just makes sense to do some things virtual, and there are some things that take place outside of the clinical space. The other big problem is just the clinical workflow. So it might be, maybe it's an EMR that needs an integration, or maybe it's just the actual process of care. The therapist is used to printing off a paper and handing that home exercise program to the patient, where if they had used this platform or this tool, they could remotely deliver a home exercise program, which would track the patient, which would allow some secure messaging, which would be overall more efficient, and then allow them to bill for these remote therapeutic monitoring codes here in the US. I'm sure in other places it just allows for better patient engagement and retention. Um, so it would allow for all this to happen. And the big problem is that just the clinicians printing off the paper, they for some reason, physios like printing off paper and handing it to patients full of exercises, and the patients like taking those papers and putting them on the floorboard of their cars and forgetting about them.
Yeah.
So really, it's just that shift and helping the clinicians work that into their normal process of care. Like, okay, we're a paperless clinic now. That's easier said than done. So we do a little bit work with the tech company around their specific tool and say, okay, your tool does XYZ. This is how it would fit into a normal clinical workflow. And then they can teach that to their clients and so on and so forth.
So that's kind of what they're hiring you for. I've got this tool.
Yeah,
How can I get the clinic and the therapists to use it? Is kind of what they're getting you to. So you talk about
exactly.
workflow.
Yeah,
So what you go in and you learn the tool or learn what they've got, and then you think, well, okay, how do I create a workflow and give them the workflow? Because
yeah,
what
basically.
what previously, Raf, you're leaving the owner buys the tech and then does a demo for the team and then expects the team to come up with a workflow. Is that where
Exactly.
it falls
Yeah.
over?
Yeah, and that's kind of where it falls over. So we do a lot of that, and then some of it is also just under like getting the owner to see the value in that tech, because sometimes if it just looks like another home exercise program, why am I going to pay for it, right? So a lot of it is
Mm.
positioning that tool in the mind of the physio owner to say, oh, this is something that is valuable, that I can, increase either the quality or the efficiency or whatever it is, increase the revenue and ultimately the profitability of the practice using this tool.
But this has been around. This is not new, is it? We're just launching all different tools. It's
Yeah.
exercise software, equipment, or a new ultrasound machine, whatever. That's been around since we started practice. It's the same. Have we just got more tools thrown at us now, or is it
Yes,
different?
there's some of that. There's some of it is repackaged old things, and then there's the whole piece of the data and AI and what that throws into the mix. So a home exercise program in and of itself is just a home exercise program, and that's not really anything novel or new. I mean, it's more convenient for the patient or the client if it's an app that they have on their phone and that they can log in and they don't need to print off papers or log into their computer. They can just pull up their phone and track their progress, kind of see their goals. That's all good and well, and there's some marginal improvement in that. The real benefit in some of this technology is really the data,
Mm.
for both the clinician and the patient, both on the patient engagement side of things, but then also on the value-based care side of things, just the quality improvement on the organization side, being able to see their data and track it and then benchmark it either compared to national or international standards or their own internal averages and standards to be able to improve the process of care within their organization. That's really where the value is in some of this technology. I tell people all the time, people come to me and they want to know how they can sell remote therapeutic monitoring to physios in the US. And I'm like, really, the money that you get from remote therapeutic monitoring is nice. It's a little gravy, but it pales in comparison to the ability to track that data and really the value that is in understanding your own numbers in the clinic from a clinical outcome standpoint to like a metrics and efficiency standpoint.
So we're going to go into some detail in a second, but can I just circle back to, let's say you've got a practice, Rafi, and got this new program you're going to launch, and half of your staff say they're just, I'm not techie. I
Yeah.
don't. How do you get how do you get around that? How do you get them to embrace it? I know you're talking about workflows. So what
Yeah.
is there training pro? How do you do it? How do you
Some
actually
of it
get
is
them to start
training,
using it?
and then some of it is just really understanding and working with the technology company itself to understand kind of like, what does Paul do when a patient comes in for an eval? What is his normal workflow? And then you kind of figure out where this technology would fit into it, where it would be a seamless transition. So, oh, instead of logging into this platform, you're just logging into a different one. That would be a very simple or very easy one to do. Sometimes it's a matter of, and there's some work on the development side, on the product development side, to say, okay, we can do single sign on, or we can do some kind of integration where it pulls data from one source to the other, so the clinician doesn't have to redo work. That's another one that's big. Like, how do we keep a clinician from having to type things twice or do the same thing over and over again, or repeat steps in the process? So some of it is on the product development side, and some of it is on the training side with the clinicians. I usually tell most of the folks that I work with, like, listen, physios, as a general rule, without painting with a broad brush, I'm going to here, like, if you tell a physiotherapy clinic, you got 5 clinicians in there, and you tell them, I'm going to move the clock in the clinic from this left wall over here to the right wall, 3 of them are going to have a heart attack. So that's just par for the course with clinicians, and part of it is just understanding that and then kind of managing the behavioral change, much like we do with clients.
I love your example because I don't think you should have clocks. I hate having clocks
Yeah,
inside practices. Everyone becomes watching how long my
yeah,
session went for. Remove the clocks. Um,
exactly, yeah,
I, I wrote down 2 things as you were talking about. I wrote down uh, easy. You've, I think if you're going to put something in, you've got to make it easy for the therapist to get
yeah,
on board with it. And you're kind of talked about that. The other thing I wrote down WIIFM. So I think if you're selling this to your staff or to your team, what's in it for them
yeah.
to use this? You've got to come at it from a benefit for them, otherwise they won't do it. Have you found that, and how have you got around that?
Yeah, some of that is very, so some of the clients we've worked with, they are able to bring in enough money to the physio practices that now these physio practices are able to give their physios bonuses. So some of it is
Ah.
like, hey, if you can do XYZ, implement this tool, and you bring in this much money, you can get $10 per patient per month, or something like that, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're seeing 500 patients in a month,
Mm.
it's a nice bonus. So there's some of that. And then the other thing is, if it is a time saver in the clinic in the documentation, then the easy pitch is like, listen, you normally spend 30 minutes a day right now typing. What if we could make it, 20? Like, what would that do for your
Mm.
life? So there's some low hanging fruit, and then there depending on how the physio practice is able to leverage that technology, there can be some real revenue gains, and most practice owners are willing to share some of that with, I believe we all want to treat our clinicians well. We want them, one,
Mm.
because we want them to stick around, and employee retention is super important too. And if there's a way that we can do it without cutting into the margins, that's great for everybody. It's great for the clinicians, it's great for the clinic owners. And if you're able to leverage some of this technology to kind of get a bigger delta in the spread in your margins, then
Yeah.
it's really, really good.
I wrote down too then, um, and you would expect to, Rafi, I know there's productivity and efficiency benefits here and financial benefits, but as you've talked about before, we're also talking about clinical outcomes.
Yeah,
And you've got to push to the therapist. It's in the best interest of the patient
absolutely.
for us to use this tool. That's part of the pitch?
Yeah, that is absolutely part of the pitch. So
Mm.
there's multiple research articles that have come out recently in the last. We actually have a podcast coming out. What day is today? It's July 10th, U.S. time. So July 12th, U.S. time. We've got a podcast coming out that dives into 4 research articles equating or connecting technology and remote or digital healthcare with clinical outcomes. So there is a lot of research coming out, and has been probably for the
Mm.
last year and a half, being published, showing that implementing some of these tools, it doesn't need to be a specific RTM tool or a specific platform, but just implementing some kind of hybridized care that allows for communication and monitoring and exchange of data, really, between clinic and client, improves clinical outcomes in the long run, and in some
Mm.
cases is superior, because it means the patient is either spending a less number of visits in the clinic, which means you can probably get more evaluations in from a standpoint of like pulling in on the wait list. The
Mm.
patient is getting happier because they're getting better. A lot of times, if there's data visualization, it motivates the patient so they can see their own progress and know that they're tracking towards their goals. And it's no longer, well, the physio tells me I'm getting better, or I think I'm getting better, I feel a little better. There's objective measures that they can look at and say, oh, when I started, I was down here and now I'm up here. So depending
Mm.
on the platform and the tool that you end up using, that you can get all those benefits where you're getting patients that are more motivated, they're seeing their progress, they're getting better quicker, they're leaving better reviews. In some cases, like in the US, you're billing for some of those codes, which is adding to your own revenue. So it's a win-win if it's done right.
Yeah. I think when you hear people say your staff won't do it if it's going to make you more money.
Yeah,
They might do it if it's going to make them more money, but they will do it if it's going to help the patient get a better outcome. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's true. Most people went into healthcare because they want to help people.
yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into remote therapeutic monitoring. We've got other things we're going to dive into as well. But when I say remote therapeutic monitoring, what am I talking about, Rafi? What is RTM?
So yeah, so according to like CMS, which is like the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services here in the US, which has kind of created the CPT codes here, it's care that is happening asynchronously, remotely, obviously remote, and it's an exchange of data to monitor non-physiological um, data points of a patient. So, there's been remote physiological monitoring for a while, and that's like cardiac or diabetes or blood pressure or something like that, where you're tracking some of this and it's sending it to a physician portal or a nurse's portal. This is specifically on the therapy side of things. So you're looking at things like maybe pain scale, a pain perception, adherence to therapy, progress with therapy, so range of motion and stuff like that, and some of these AI driven or algorithmic driven softwares that can like take measurements via web camera or something like that. But it's basically at the very, very basics, it's the patient is receiving some sort of therapy service, and then they go out, they go home, they go back to their community or whatever in between visits, and there's some sort of exchange of data from the patient side to the clinician side, where the physiotherapist can look at the data and track or monitor the patient's progress and then troubleshoot things. So like maybe they have a question about an exercise and they can shoot a message back and forth. In the US, there's specifics about what is actually required. Like within a 30-day period, there needs to be one quote unquote synchronous interaction between the clinician and the patient to build some of these codes. But that's essentially it at the baseline, is that there's some sort of exchange of data where the clinician is able to track and monitor the progress of a patient in the time where the patient is not in the clinic.
So we're talking about like range of motion, repetitions, and
Yeah,
exercise adherence.
exercise
Um,
completion, stuff like that. Yeah.
okay, well, so how does it work though? What is it? Is it an app? Is it or it could be any of that? What is it? Like
Sure. So
what does the patient take home?
yeah, exactly. So it could be a device, it could be a piece of software or an application, um, as long as it's transmitting data. So, for example, there's one here in the US, it's like a Bluetooth dynamometer. So the patient can take it home and they squeeze it, and there's exercises associated with it. And that's sending data to the clinician, and the clinician can pull it up and say, oh, Rafi did it, and his grip strength went from 5 pounds last week, and now he's at 10 pounds this week, and he's able to track it. And he did his exercises 5 days this week instead of 4 days last week, and things like that. And then there's other uh, data interfaces where it's really just the patient. It's a home exercise program. The patient logs in, they mark the exercises they did. In some cases, it'll like a webcam will shoot the like videotape the person doing the exercises and then giving feedback. So, okay, he did this exercise, he did a squat, and there was 5% variance on his right to his left knee, and gives a little bit of data there for the clinician to work on. So it's really wide ranging. It can be either a software, an app, or a device. Usually, it's a combination of a device that's providing some feedback, so like a wearable might work or something like that. But the main thing is that there's usually some kind of software interface. It's either an app on the patient's phone or a portal that they're logging into for the patient to input the data or to track themselves, and then for the clinician to see it on the other end.
So they could be setting up their phone as a camera with an app, and it's videoing their exercise session.
Yes,
It's so they're logged into the portal and it's tracking what time the session started. It's tracking sets and reps and
exactly.
ranges.
Yep. And then
Really?
sometimes the performance of those, sometimes it'll track in the US, like how much time the clinician is actually spending in their end of the platform. Because once you get to a certain level in the US, you can bill a different code, and that's another, $50 or $60 code that you can get. So most of these platforms will track both ends. They'll track the patient side, and then they'll track, okay, Rafi was actually logging into Mr. Smith's um, exercise program and monitoring it with him and updating his exercises. And he spent 30 minutes this month doing that so he can build this code, basically.
It makes sense, Refi, when you think like heart rate monitors. The cardiologist sends you home with your
Yeah.
heart rate. Now that makes a lot of sense. But this is just the next level, isn't it? And it's
Yeah.
the person goes home with a heart rate monitor. What does the patient go home with? I don't know, are there wearable things where the garment measures joint angle? Is that around, or am I making this up?
There are some in the works, and there's some that have gotten some VC funding and some early seed funding for it. Yeah. It's just a matter of it's different, I'm sure, in different jurisdictions. In the US, everything's monitored by the FDA, and it's got to be an FDA approved medical device, or software as a medical device is what they call it here, which is a pretty broad definition. um, but yeah, there are things like that in the works for sure. A lot of the ones that I've seen recently have been either web camera based, where
Mhm.
the patient does just set up their web camera either on their smartphone or a tablet and do their exercises, and there's some sort of assessment component, and it's sending that information, or some sort of device where it's either tracking some kind of objective measure like grip strength or edema or something like that, and then sending that information off as well.
Is it enough if it's just patient reported? So I'm your patient. I log into your portal and I tell you how many reps I did, how many exercises I did. Is that adequate, or that's not good enough?
I mean, that would be adequate in some cases. It just depends on how it's done. So if the portal that you're using is again, a lot of this pertains to the US here, pertains, or if it falls under the software as a medical device, then yes, most of those have like check boxes or completions where the patient, when they log in, it tracks that they logged in, so they can see, you can see that Paul logged in on Monday at 3 o'clock, and then you can see that he's, completed five reps of this exercise or 10 reps of this exercise, or he completed all of his exercise or whatever it is. And it's more like either a checkbox or the patient is selecting them themselves, or it's tracking it like as most of those training apps, like you're going to do this exercise, it shows you the exercise and then it moves on to the next one and then it counts that as completed.
Okay. Can I talk about the money then? So if we're happy with the tech,
Sure.
we get some sort of device or software that's letting them track something on us. How does the money model work then? You talked about codes and other things. Now that
Yeah.
how's that all work? Some of us out of the US won't understand that. Take us through the
Sure.
maybe leading into how we're going to make money out of it in the end. But
Exactly. Yeah. How do you make
what's the
money out of
model?
it?
Yeah.
If you're in the United States, then you can bill for remote therapeutic monitoring codes, so RTM codes. And there's a whole lot of nuances about when you can bill these codes and when you don't bill these codes. Basically, the long and short of it is you need to get the patient set up on the remote therapeutic monitoring device or platform. They need to do it for 16 out of the 30 days, so basically 52% of the month. And then there's time requirements. The clinician needs to spend 20 minutes in the given course monitoring the patient. But the term monitoring is pretty broad. Phone calls count, even time in the clinic can count if you're updating the exercise program, if you're showing the patient how to log in, all of that kind of stuff. And then
Okay,
those
hang on.
codes,
So they're going to do six. So they're going to do 16 interventions or something in the
yeah,
month. So many
16
minutes.
instances of data interchange. So it could be
Okay,
the patient logs in 16 times and does their exercises. That counts because it's sending the
okay.
data to the clinician.
And then therapist has to do so many minutes of
Yeah,
something with that data.
exactly.
And what can they? How much is that? A one? That's one service. Is that one fee?
Well, it's
What's
three
that?
different codes. So you get a setup code. I know, and leave it to the US to make this super
Only in
simple.
America.
Yeah. So you
Only in
have the
America.
setup code, you have the device supply code, so you can actually charge the patient for access to the device.
Yep.
And then you have the remote therapeutic monitoring codes themselves, which are the time that the clinician spends monitoring, and there's two codes for that. So you could potentially bill up to four codes in a month, which comes out to around $300 to $400 per course of care, if based off of like a 12 week plan, which is not insignificant. I mean, you're talking, if most people are charging $100 a visit or something like that, you're talking adding 30% to your um, to the top line really easily, for doing stuff that a lot of clinicians are already doing. Like how many times are you on the
Mm.
phone with the patient talking to them about their home exercise program or adjusting a home exercise program or modifying sets and reps? So you're just taking this and now you're doing it online and you're doing it through a portal and now you're billing for it. Outside of the US, the real value here, and really in the US, this is what I tell the clients that I'm working with. Like in the US, remote therapeutic monitoring, the money that you get from the codes is really just gravy. The real value here is using the technology to increase touch points between the clinician and the patient
Yeah.
so that the patient is showing up, they're motivated. If you can take that, like I said at the beginning, 7 out of 10 patients don't complete their course of care. If you can cut that in half, that's buku
Mm.
money that you're putting in your pocket. That, yeah, there might be a little bit of an investment for the technology, but it's helping you get so much on the back end. The cost analysis is pretty easy to do.
Yeah, and I mean, 16 touch points out of 32 days. Like if that's what it requires,
Yeah,
you're forcing the patient to stay in contact with you, and then vice versa. You're forcing the therapist to stay on top of
yeah.
this patient, even though they're not in front of them in the diary.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and a lot of it too is like some of these platforms you can do, if it's an app, you can do push notifications, you can do text notifications. So that the client is then always feeling like the therapist is there with them and walking with them and building. So you go at the beginning, you talk about humanizing healthcare. Like it's helping
Mm.
build that relationship between the clinician and the client, even if it's just a perceived relationship. The patient now is getting these text messages and updates and contacts between the clinician, and now they're feeling like, okay, Rafi's really monitoring me. He's keeping track of me. He's not just in here, twice a week when I'm in the clinic, but I'm also able to message him back and forth. Like, it does a lot for the therapeutic rapport as well.
Right. Because you talked about patient adherence. So obviously that's increasing touch point, a reason to
Yeah.
contact them. Have you seen, I don't know if you have, like we know the compliance with home exercise program without this must be just rubbish. Like
Oh yeah, it's terrible.
do we know what it is? It's like 1%, 10%
Yeah,
maybe people do their exercises.
the
What?
data is like, it was single digits last time I looked at it, like the number of people that actually complete. Now, the people that complete the home exercise program, their outcomes are super, super good. It's just getting them to do it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So there's that.
What I love, we'll laugh with my guys. Our clients talk a lot about the home exercise program, and
Uh-huh.
I keep telling them how often I think the home exercise program stops the person coming back because they come back not done it. And the first question the therapist asks them is, how'd you go with your exercises?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't do them. So as a result, the person feels bad every time they come in and
And
they
then they
drop
don't
off.
show up
It
again. Yeah.
happens all the time.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get but
So if
from
you
what
can
you've
do it
seen
on
of
a
this,
platform, for example, or an app like this, you can shoot a message to the patient the day after and say, "Hey, I noticed you didn't do your exercises. Is there anything we can troubleshoot before you come in next week?" Or, I noticed that you only did 5 out of the 10 exercises that, or whatever it is. What can we do to troubleshoot this so that you get the best benefit out of it? And then the patient is feeling like, okay, we're collaborating. It's not like I'm coming into the clinic and getting fussed at for not doing my exercises.
so the devil's advocate says if we can single digits compliance with people from the regular method, here's your home exercises, see you in a
Yeah.
week. What sort of compliance are we getting when we use remote therapeutic monitoring? What studies have we seen? If we are, what compliance are we getting with this model?
Yeah, a lot of it is anecdotal because this has really been, at least in the US here,
Mm.
for the last year. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the average age of people that are completing this, because it's all Medicare, is like in the 70s, like low 70s. So you're talking, these are not people that would call themselves techie, but they're logging in and they're completing it. And people that are doing and adhering to, or involved in remote therapeutic monitoring, um, I would have to look at the studies again, but I mean, it's significant. You're talking 40% adherence to exercises and stuff like that, which is, good when you're considering like it was 10 before. So
Mm-hmm.
you're like tripling what was the standard. And then as these things get easier to use, we're seeing that number get higher and higher. I've got patients right now, or clients that I've worked with, who, here in the US, they're working with a few physiotherapy clinics that their average, because it's all Medicare age, the average age in this is like in the 70s, and they're looking at like 90+% adherence, which is amazing. It's wonderful. So I think over the next several years, as some of these research articles get pushed through the peer review process, it's going to be a no-brainer not to be doing this, right?
And when you talk about asynchronous notification,
Sure.
what do you mean by that?
So that could be like a secure message, like an instant messaging app. So it's HIPAA compliant. It's a portal. Most quality home exercise programs will allow you to do this, where you can shoot Paul a message and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Or they can shoot you a message. I was doing this exercise and I had pain right here. Should I cut back? Should I do more? What should I do? So there's that asynchronous piece, and then there's just the data change, right? So I don't have to be there watching you do the exercises. I can log into my portal once a day or once every other day and see that Rafi did his exercises for the last 2 days, or he didn't. So it's time for me to shoot a message or a notification to him to have him do them.
What I wrote down then, this is a Dan Kennedy principle of protecting your herd.
Yeah,
You're you're putting a fence around your database and saying you're in my world. We're remote monitoring you. You're part of our program. There's highly unlikely that person is going to jump ship to someone else when they're fully invested
oh, exactly. Yeah.
in you and what you're doing with them. It's a protection mechanism in itself.
Yeah. Well, and there's a little bit of platform risk there too, right? Like if maybe the patient likes the home exercise program and they like logging into the app and seeing the exercise, and they go down to the physio clinic down the road and they don't have that, they're maybe
Yeah.
less likely to jump.
Tell me about costs and setup, Rafi, for
Sure.
when companies that you've helped do this. What are they spending to get this sort of tech up and running? What do they need? What software? What hardware?
Yeah, some
Tell
of
me about
this
that.
is most all of it can be done. At least the software side of things is all software based. You're not needing to bring anything into the clinic. Some devices, the pricing model depends on the business model in the jurisdiction. So, like in the U.S., a lot of that is maybe it's an upfront cost that's billed to the clinician's insurance. Sometimes they're charging the physiotherapy clinic for the device, and then they're just passing that cost on to the patient. Um, and then there's the licensing fee for the software, which is either per clinic or per clinician. And there's as many options out there as there are companies doing this. There's some companies that are charging, per patient per month. There are some companies that are charging per here in the U.S. like it's a percentage of RTM codes that are billed and collected. Some of them are charging just a standard, $50 a clinician per month. So I mean, you could really go a million different ways with how it's priced, but you're looking at a couple $100 maybe a month in costs on the low end. And if you're doing like a revenue share or something like that, it could be significantly higher if you're billing out thousands of dollars worth of these codes every month.
And if it's software based, you're set up. You don't need anything. It's on
Yeah,
the patient's phone, I'd assume.
exactly. Yeah. So the patient obviously would have to have a smartphone with the
Yeah.
ability to download an app.
Okay. But give me some examples of ones you've seen. Who have examples of people who've done this the best? What have you seen across the healthcare field where you think this company did a really good job of integrating remote therapeutic monitoring? Give me some examples of how they've done it or what they were, if you can.
Yeah, there have been a couple that I've seen recently, and I mentioned that they use like a webcam based um, platform, and they use some sort of algorithmic learning of some kind. So the very basic remote therapeutic monitoring is like, here's a home exercise program that we can track you with online via your app, and that is compelling
Mhm.
to some people, and it provides data and provides value. The step above that, which is really kind of next level, is okay, here are the exercises. You're going to have access to the app, but when you log into the app, you set your phone up on the desk and you do your exercises. And not only will it track that you're doing your exercises and it will help me out, but you're going to get real time feedback of your form. So maybe if you're doing a squat, for example, it's tracking your shoulders, your hips, and your knees, maybe your ankles, and giving you the angles. And if there's a variance between right and left, what the quality of, how low in the squat, did you really get to 90 or were you stopping at like 75? How much did you get, right? And then giving that information to the clinician, but then also allowing the patient to see it on their app when they're looking at it, so they can say, okay, I myself did these exercises and now I can see, oh man, I didn't get as low as I should have, or I'm experiencing pain, or my quality of movement it isn't as good. And that does two things. One, it's keeping the patient involved, right? It's keeping them motivated to get better. But then it's giving the clinician objective data that then they can go to, if it's a payer, and say, listen, he needs therapy still because he's not able to get to the 90 degrees that he needs for
Mm.
his job or his whatever it is. Or value-based reimbursement systems where it's like, okay, we're giving you, like you need to justify your outcomes. Well, these outcomes are in 5 visits, he got from 0 to 90, or from zero to, he was able to increase his functional capacity. So the ones that are doing it really, really well are providing a level of data that both justifies the cost of therapy to a payer or another stakeholder, but then also gives the patient and the clinician like visualization of the progress, because it helps motivate and keeps the patient involved and all of that.
Okay. I just love the whole area of it.
Yeah.
I just love the opportunity it presents for us to look after our database. And I think the other thing that I heard you say, Rafa, in one of your podcasts, because we get concerned about remote treatment compared to hands-on treatment,
Yeah.
and I think one thing that you talk about, it's not an either or, it's a combination. You talk about hybrid.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about your principle of your philosophy on that? Because it's interesting for
Sure.
us to know.
So when we were first doing, like when telehealth really became popular during the pandemic and people couldn't go into the clinic, there was this really big push into telehealth, and people thought, okay, well, that means I'm going to be able to have a telehealth only practice, which may work in some cases, but there became this dichotomy of like, okay, you're either on the telehealth track or you're on the in-clinic track. Maybe if you missed an appointment, we can do telehealth, but there's really this either or. And especially with like remote therapeutic monitoring, some of these tech tools that are in the wings here, it we really need to look at it not so much as an either or, but this what we call a hybrid model. So it's just another tool in the toolbox. The same way that we might give a patient um, an exercise in the clinic and then modify it when they're at home, we would do with them after an evaluation. They come in, they get set up on this program, and the continuity of care continues in
Mm.
the time that the patient isn't in the clinic. So even if on your best, if you have an awesome physio who's selling awesome plans of care 3 times a week for 6 weeks or whatever, like there's still a day in between when the patient isn't there. And the research would indicate that in order for the patient to get better, they need to do things when they're not in the clinic. So
Mm.
this type of leveraging technology in this way allows clinicians to ensure that the patients are getting the benefit of therapy, that they're carrying over those skills in the home, and and really moving more towards that self-management thing. So um, the big problem that I had originally with telehealth was this idea that we're just going to take what we're doing in the clinic and then do it virtually, bill it for telehealth, and call it a day. And that's really, I mean, first of all, it's lackluster. And there's expectation issues that you got to deal with. Like if a patient is expecting like hands-on therapy, what's the point in going if you're not gonna, you can't touch me over the computer screen. So you have to get over that hurdle. But then the other piece is like, look at the real value that clinicians bring to the table. And it's
Yeah.
not that we can, some of those technical skills that we have, the real value that we bring to the table is knowledge transfer, and then the ability to empower patients to become self-managers of their own pain eventually. We know everybody with low back pain is going to have low back pain again at some point in their life. So what we want to be able to do is provide them the tools to be able to manage it on their own in a year, in 2 years, whenever they have a relapse or something like that, or re-injure it.
Mm.
And the value in the telehealth and virtual care and remote therapeutic monitoring is that it's enabling us to do that very intensely while they're under our course of care, and then we discharge them into the world, and they've hopefully have gotten the skills they need to be able to manage on their own.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because you talk about the importance of knowledge transfer. So we talk about
Yeah,
knowledge transfer work, but typically our health systems haven't really rewarded us
exactly.
financially for that. Even the codes of the telehealth and other things on Australia,
Yeah.
they've stopped the rebatable thing for some of the
Uh-huh.
remote consultations. So we want to be valued as knowledge-based transferers, but our reimbursement system doesn't
Yeah.
support that. Have you got the
Yeah.
same issue? Have you seen the same?
We do, but I always counter with this. Like if you look at least here in the US, the codes that are reimbursed at the highest levels, what are they? It's the initial evaluation,
Mm.
the reevaluation, and the discharge, which means that even
Mm.
the payers that are paying for services realize that the real value in the clinicians is the initial consultation. You're using the brain and the knowledge of the clinician, and then the reevaluation to track progress. And they're
Mm.
putting less value on the interim treatment time. Um, so as we move into more of a like a virtual, not virtual first, but this hybrid model, it's going to allow clinicians and organizations to capitalize on that and spend more time doing those high value, or at least high
Mm.
perceived value services, and then managing some of the less valuable or less profitable work via remote ways or tech enabled ways.
I love the word used value. You talked about value-based reimbursement.
Yeah,
So we're not just paying for the time they deliver, we're paying for the outcomes. That's kind of what you're talking about. What's the
exactly.
outcome for
Yeah.
the patient? And
Yeah, and in the US in particular, there are organizations like private insurances that are moving that way. They're saying, okay, national benchmark is for a total knee replacement, it takes national benchmark is 16 visits of physiotherapy. If you can get them done in anything less, we'll share with you 50% of the savings, or I mean, which is pretty enticing. Or
mm.
there's things like, okay, we know that it's 16 visits typically for a total knee replacement, so we're just going to give you a lump sum of X number of dollars that averages out to whatever it is per visit. Whether you see the patient for 2 visits or 120 visits, you're just getting this lump sum. So there is movement here in the US of this drive towards they're incentivizing outcomes and efficiency.
Mm.
And things like this, remote therapeutic monitoring, virtual care, allows us to deliver some of that care, get the outcomes we need without having to spend a lot of that high capital intensive work of the patient coming into the clinic so often.
Mm. I love what you said too. Don't say you're looking at doing this. Say this has sparked your interest in getting some sort of remote therapeutic thing happening. I like your comment in one of your podcasts. Don't just fit the tool into the regular pay for service model. It is different.
Yeah,
Is like so because that's a mistake, is that we think we run our practice the same, and then we've just got this new bit of software or this new thing, and we just continue exactly what we're doing, just putting that in. But you're saying that's the mistake. We need a new
exactly.
workflow.
Yeah, you need a new workflow, and it's really just changing the way you view what you do. So, if your bread and butter is every patient comes in, every client comes in, and they get 2 visits a week for 6 weeks, and then we kind of figure out where we go from there. Um, you can bolt on some of this stuff into that model. Um, but if you really take this approach of hybrid care, then you really start thinking about doing things differently. And maybe there is a way that instead of this patient coming in 2 times a week for 12 weeks, they come in once every other week, but we're remote therapeutic monitoring them. They're paying for cash for some of these services, or for access to us. Maybe we open up some kind of subscription model. It just opens up the door for a lot of different really revenue models in the business, because you have this tool now that's allowing you to do some things at lower cost than you could have ever done them before.
I think that's right. You got to go in thinking this is not just a tool. This could change the way you do your business.
Exactly.
This could
Yeah.
there's got to be a separate part of, even a separate party of business. Oh, you're suitable for our remote therapeutic monitoring
Yeah.
pathway, Rafi. So we
Well, and
and
you've
they
seen
move
it
from this
happen in the
pathway to that
athletic
pathway.
trainer space. I get it all the time. I'm a runner. I try to run and be healthy. And the amount of, running coaches now that have an app or have a program or have, maybe they're based in LA or in Texas. And instead of being confined now to their tiny little,
Mm.
their suburban area of a couple million people, now they're reaching the world because they've got this program or something like that. Like, physiotherapy should be thinking about moving in that direction. And it's just a matter of time, I think, until some of these entrepreneurial folks really do catch on and start blowing it up.
Is it really kicking off though, Rafik? I mean, you're in the space. Are you getting? Is it really? Is it, what percentage of practices now in the States would have a remote therapeutic monitoring aspect? Is it big? Is it growing?
It is big. It is growing. I don't have numbers. I can tell you the amount of companies though that have raised millions of dollars in this space
Mm.
is growing exponentially. So I mean, there's a push into it, and a lot of it is being driven not even so much by the physiotherapy clinics here in the U.S., but by payers and payer organizations, managed care organizations. So I mean, I think this is the beginning of a big tidal wave, and it's just a
And
matter of
if let
making sure you end up on top.
with our audience being global and everyone's got a different need or different profession, where do they go to find the best company for them, or the best? Is it a Google search? Where do they go to find the best provider of these remote therapeutic monitoring tools? Where would they go?
Yeah, Google will work. Especially if you're not hindered by like this fee for service model we have in the US. Really, what you're looking for is just something that easily integrates, and this is what I would look for: something that easily integrates into what I'm already doing software wise, whether it be through an API or through single sign-on or something like that. Something that ticks the boxes for what I want the care to look like. Is it like a remote therapeutic monitoring program itself, or is it just something like we're going to become a paperless clinic? No patient is going to get a paper home exercise program ever, because we're going to do this with the end goal of patient engagement and retention and completion. And then you just look for a software that um, fits those requirements, because you don't have to worry about a lot of the RTM codes and stuff like that outside of the state. It really does kind of free you up to what you do and don't do, right? Um, so
So do your
Single search.
insurers have lists of companies? So if you're in the States, for example, you would go to your insurance company and say which ones are registered, or is that how they would?
No,
Like,
some
how are
so
your clients finding?
some of them have done that. Like some insurances have coupled with different providers for different vendors for some of these services. But really, it's just a matter of finding in the U.S. anyways, finding a provider or vendor that qualifies for quote software as a medical device, and then using that within your current workflows to bill for the RTM codes. And then it's really
Okay.
finding a payer that pays for them. So right now in the US, there's a handful of payers that will reimburse for codes, for remote therapeutic monitoring codes, and then there are some that don't. So a lot of it is like patient specific. Okay, this patient qualifies because they have this insurance company that will pay for RTM. And that's how some clinics are doing it. I advise my folks, I'm like, do it to everybody, because sooner or later all these other companies are going to get on board. And really, if you're getting the
Mm.
benefit of not having these patients drop off and fall off into the ether, um, the minor investment for carrying the remote therapeutic monitoring program into some of these populations way falls short of the amount of revenue gains that you can get from getting your patients to complete their course of care.
Because you're kind of reverse engineering the marketing, aren't you? If I'm a company, a software company of this RTM space, I contact Rafi, mate, how do I position this to the marketplace?
Yeah.
Part of what you're doing, I suppose, is advising me on my marketing strategies. How do I then get my message in front of these? Are you
Yeah, what's a
sending them to the?
compelling
Are you
message
sending them?
for these
Yeah,
people?
are you
Yeah.
sending them to the journals? Are you getting on their websites and checking out their SEO? Like, what marketing advice are you giving them to get their message out there to these
Yeah,
providers, these health companies?
a lot of it is based off of the actual what their product or device does, and then how that might be valuable to a clinician in XYZ space. So some of that involves market research. We do part of our, we call it the market penetration roadmap, but there's a portion of that where we go out and do we survey 100, 200 of their potential clients, and then we come back with some of the data of what's valuable, what's not valuable, what might be the most compelling thing in that. We do a positioning workshop with these organizations, and a lot of times, the tech people that are coming up with these products are, you know, not to speak disparagingly, but they're like engineers. They're computer engineers, so they really understand the technology. They think
Yeah.
it's really cool, and a lot of it really is. But they get latched onto like one feature that they think is like going to be the game changer, and then they'll talk with me about it. I'm like, yeah, but that's not really valuable. What's really valuable is this other piece right here that you don't really spend a whole lot of time on, but this is going to make clinicians' lives really easy.
Mm.
So a lot of what I do as well is like just helping them sift through of all the features that you have that are amazing and awesome and whiz bang, like what actually makes a clinician's life easier, and then how do you just capitalize on that so that they see the benefit of it. Because if you have something that's going to be super valuable, but the clinician just sees it as another home exercise program, like why are they going to pay you $100 a month for this home exercise program when they can do, what is it, HEP to go that's free? Like
Yeah.
what is the value proposition there?
It's interesting you say that. I spoke to another tech guy yesterday because I'm in this space at the moment talking to you guys like you about what's coming up. And he said he's got this great platform that does all these amazing RTM sort of things, but he's selling it on the fact that if you put your phone in the treatment room, it'll transcribe your notes and put them directly into your software system. So you never have to write notes again. That, that's
Yeah.
that's the feature. What's the benefit? Well, and the therapist says, well, that's fantastic. I don't have to write notes again.
Yeah, exactly.
Even
Yeah,
even though it does
perfect
all these other
example.
things, even though it does all these other things, that's what I want to focus on. So you can see the ads. Never write clinical notes again.
Yeah.
Be safe from litigation. Whatever else comes up. Yeah, I love this space, Rafi. If people want to find out more about you and what you're doing, with your Better Outcomes show and everything else, where do they
Sure.
go? What's the deal?
Easiest place to find me is raffisalazar.com, or you can go to betteroutcomes.show.
And if I'm a software, because you're also looking for companies that want to position. So where do they
Yeah.
go for that? Is that the
So
same
if
site?
you're if you're a tech company serving the musculoskeletal, the physiotherapy space, you can just reach out to me, raffisalazar.com, or rehabpracticesolutions.com. There's links everywhere to book a call with me.
I love everything you do. I love watching the journey, you guys. So when I speak to you a couple of years ago and I see you now, what have
Yeah.
these guys moved into?
Yeah.
But you've kind of just solved a problem because this tech and AI is going so fast. The companies need to know how to position it, and
Yeah.
you're just giving us
I
a
was
way
just
to
in the
do it.
right
You'll give
space
us
at the right
leverage.
time, you know?
Rafi Sala, thank you so much for joining us on the program. As always, mate, I loved it. Thank you.
All right. Take it easy.
I'll see you in the next episode. Too easy, Rafi. That was just
Yeah.
that wasn't that in your wheelhouse. That was right up your alley,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
That was good.
You've done the same one 1,000 times.